It's Oscars week in America, so let's talk immigrants, immigration, and the movies. My guest this week is Monica Castillo, who has written extensively on how today's immigrant experience is absent from mainstream Hollywood film.
I don't really see my sort of experience or my family's experience reflected in film. We had an Argentine film called Nobody's Watching that discusses what it's like for someone to leave their country to try and work and make things work in New York City. But that's not being done at the studio level. That's not being done with the major players. I don't see Sofia Vergara taking on one of those roles. In terms of what we call like sort of the popular imagination, the mainstream films, the movies that everyone's talking about, that is not getting the same level of play or attention. I feel like these movies are getting cornered off and just not talked about or not even being made, essentially.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani. Yes, it's Oscars week and the National Immigration Forum office pool is getting pretty heated. For my part, I'm tripling down on Black Panther because, well, Wakanda. In any case, one of my favorite movies from 2018 was Crazy Rich Asians, a story about immigration, Asian culture, ethnicity, and class. It was also about stereotyping stereotypes to shed light on real stories. Constance Wu, the movie's lead actress, made a really strong point in this interview with Variety magazine.
What stereotype would you like to see just completely retired from Hollywood?
I do not want to see any stereotype retired from Hollywood. I know that's controversial. I want to see the people who have been stereotyped given their own story, because the danger of a stereotype is that they're one-dimensional. I love that we have sexy Asian leading men.
The Nick you're dating is Nick Young?
Yeah, you guys know them or something?
Hells yeah. They're just the biggest developers in all of Singapore.
Damn, Rachel. It's like the Asian Bachelor.
But I also want nerdy Asian men to feel that they are worthy of love. And the problem is when you make fun of them in a secondary role where you don't explore their whole lives. That's why I keep stressing this thing about being the center of the story, not because I want to be like, oh, I'm a star, because I'm not, but because that's how you get rid of stereotypes, not by trying to be the cool guy, because that makes the other guy feel like they're not worth anything. But if you say to that other guy or that other girl, like, even though you're not the beauty queen, you have a story. And people want to know, and you have depth to you. You have more than one dimension. So I think we should take a lot of the stereotypes and just give them their own story so they can get to show more than one dimension.
In her review of Crazy Rich Asians, my guest, Monica Castillo, wrote, I left Crazy Rich Asians beaming, not because of the film's wild parties with synchronized swimmers or the over-the-top wedding of Nick's best friend, but because of how much love is in the film between a mother and a daughter, couples, and among friends and family. To see an American audience identify with the hyphen-American experience, my experience and that of Rachel's, felt rewarding on an entirely different level. Which is why Monica's work and perspective is so very important. Because, in Hollywood's eyes, migration to our country stopped in the 1960s. Which means that there just aren't that many movies that portray immigration and integration in the modern day. Therein lies the opportunity. Crazy Rich Asians, Kumail Nanjiani's The Big Sick, and many others are beginning to fill this gap and define a new American age of cinema. As you will hear, Monica and I covered a lot of ground in our conversation in a noisy New York City coffee shop. But really, what sticks with me from our conversation is her assessment that we're not telling the stories of people leaving. Whether we're journalists, advocates, or movie makers, we tell the story of the arrival in America, even the story of the journey to America. But rarely do we tell the story of the decision, a decision that often comes with embarrassment or shame, to leave or to migrate. Because that's a really different story, and it's a much more difficult story to tell. I would argue that, after talking with Monica, and hopefully you'd agree after hearing this episode, that this may actually be the most important story that we have to tell. The story of people actually deciding to migrate. So I hope you enjoy this episode of Only in America. I certainly did, and here's Monica Castillo.
Both sides of my family are from Cuba. They took different trajectories and different migration waves. My dad came in the 60s, just right after Castro took power. And then my mother came in the Mariel boat lifts of the 80s. Florida was just kind of where people set up camp, and they had family friends, and they heard about work, and like, you can get work here, and okay, they didn't want to live in Miami, and they decided Tampa was going to be the right choice. And my parents met just shortly after high school.
So did you grow up in a Cuban community?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
My first language was Spanish, and then I had to learn English the hard way in school. I connect a lot with the culture. I stay in touch with my family as much as possible. Now, thanks to the internet situation in Cuba actually getting better, I've been able to keep in touch with cousins out there.
So you grew up in Tampa, then where to?
And then I went to Boston, Massachusetts for college. Yeah, I went to Boston University. I basically applied to a bunch of different colleges. At that point, I was pre-med and was going to pursue a career as a doctor. And it was tough. It was the first time I was living away from my parents. Back when I was growing up, I wasn't even allowed to do sleepovers. Like, I just never had been without my family there. But that turned out pretty okay. I found friends, I found groups and things that I filled my schedule with. But then like halfway through my college years, I decided to change majors. My friends had an intervention and brought to my attention that my heart wasn't in the sciences as much as I thought. I love helping people and I like working with people, but I didn't like the solitary, me against the world attitude that sometimes exists in that pre-med culture. People aren't always willing to help you out. People, it's a competition to see who will make the best grades, who will ace the finals. I did it to an extent, but it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And it was hard for me to admit that because I'd been saying I wanted to be a doctor since I was like 4 years old. Like, that was the only career I knew. As a child of immigrants, the joke is you have like 3 career trajectories, and one of them is medicine.
3 of them are medicine.
Yeah, 3 are medicine. Yeah, it was like engineering, lawyer, or medicine.
Exactly.
And then I was walking away from that, and I was going into sociology because I had taken some classes and I really enjoyed that. And that was a big shock for my family. I think it took them a while for them to get around and to eventually support me in writing. I covered my first film festival, and when I was done, I told my mom that's what I want to do. Like, I'd just been bitten by a bug.
Yeah, what was the bug?
I went to South by Southwest in 2011. I had no money. I had to basically fundraise for my trip out there. I lived off of cereal and whatever food they were giving away, or I would buy a sandwich in the afternoon, and that was also my dinner. I learned that I could meet friends and talk to people because this was before rideshare apps and things like that. I would try to bum rides to go across the bridge because it was so unsafe for pedestrians at night. But in all this madness, I was just having the greatest time watching like 5 movies a day, and I just couldn't believe that I was here, that I found other people like me, that were also super into film. I made friends on that trip that I'm still friends with today.
What was the first film that you saw that you said, okay, this is what I want to do?
I don't know if there was a film that made me like want to be a critic. There was a film that made me sort of sit up and pay attention, and that was Lawrence of Arabia, which may have its own issues and things like that. It's part of the reason why it's so fascinating to me. You can look at this film in so many different ways. And for me, it was a lot of the filmmaking and the performances by Omar Sharif and Peter O'Toole that really got my attention. I saw it in about middle school, and I was like,
Yeah.
So this is what a director does. And this is an edit. There's that famous cutaway scene where he blows out a match, and then it jump cuts to the sun, like rising. Like, wow. I've watched that movie almost every year or every other year, and occasionally I've seen it on the big screen, and it still blows me away.
Really?
I still can tap into that memory of just being so bowled over by that image.
So I'm kind of fascinated by that because there's so much in a film, right? There's the story, there's the acting, there's the photography, there's the editing. When I watch a film, I just focus on the story maybe, or maybe just the acting. How did you, I guess, develop that depth of saying, okay, these are the pieces that are fitting together?
I've always had an interest in photography, and my mom was also really into the arts. She would be the one who would take us to museums and things like that. And back when Bravo used to put on foreign language films, like, she would put those on and make sure that we knew that there's more than just Hollywood movies out there.
So you had written about Hollywood not having stories about DACA recipients.
Undocumented immigrants. Yeah.
Right. What led you to that place, and how do you feel like the industry has changed or hasn't changed since then?
That piece came out of just a lot of frustration. I was working at the New York Times and not allowed to be really political. And it was hard for me because this isn't really a political matter, or in my case, I don't feel like it is. It's a personal matter. You know, I have friends who are on DACA. I know people who are on DACA. I have family members who are in the various stages of the immigration paperwork process nightmare, that whole system. And I know how demoralizing, how long it takes, and just for some people, there's no path. There's just no option. And I wanted to do something. I wanted to talk about that. I'm interested in the topic. I'm interested because I don't really see my sort of experience or my family's experience reflected in film. So I know other people probably feel that way too. So I started poking around and looking. We had an Argentine film called Nobody's Watching that discusses what it's like for someone to leave their country to try and work and make things work in New York City, and then what happens when all your plans fall apart. But that's not being done at the studio level. That's not being done with the major players. I don't see Sofia Vergara taking on one of those roles. In terms of what we call like sort of the popular imagination, the mainstream films, the movies that everyone's talking about, that is not getting the same level of play or attention. I feel like these movies are getting cornered off and just not talked about or not even being made, essentially. Which is odd because Hollywood, in a historical context, is very much built by immigrants. The studios were set up by a lot of Jewish immigrants.
Right.
Charlie Chaplin, one of his big breakout shorts, was called The Immigrant. We had a lot of directors in the 70s who were either the children of immigrants, the grandchildren of immigrants, or immigrants themselves. We have Scorsese, we have Coppola, we have Spielberg. Barry Levinson also has made movies about this. And then we had Alfred Hitchcock come over. We had Elia Kazan. We had a lot of people. Fritz Lang, a lot of talented people come over to find work and influence the way that we watch popular entertainment. And yet we're not looking or making those stories. And for me, that was kind of like, a moment. Because a lot of the movies that I've seen recently, they tend to really romanticize the immigration experience through the Ellis Island checkpoint.
Right.
And then once that's done, it's like immigration stopped in the 60s. I don't know.
Right.
Which obviously is around the time
It's
of
still
my
happening.
It's still happening, right? Today.
Breaking
It's
news,
happening right now.
Right.
Yeah, my parents started coming to this country in the 60s. There's no movie equivalent of that. There's no Godfather Part 2 for that. I love the movie Brooklyn, but that's set in the 50s.
Dear Rose, thank you for your letter. I was happy to hear about your golf tournament. You must have been really pleased. I still miss you and Mother and think about you every day. But I think I can say that for the first time since I've been in America, I'm really happy.
I would have loved to have seen what that kind of version of the movie looked like now.
Yeah. So then what's the problem?
I think the problem is that they don't see this value in these stories.
Yeah.
They don't see it making money. And that's a really big problem. It's an issue that we're only going to relegate these movies into tiny spheres. They have to be little passion projects. They have to be someone's Kickstarter campaign film in order for it to get made. Because otherwise it just won't exist.
Or that it's a very, very small part of a much bigger movie, right?
I've noticed in television's been incorporating issues of undocumented people a lot better, but it always tends to be like the very special episode kind of thing, where it's a guest character. It's not usually one of the central characters. Jane the Virgin made it one of the central characters version, but it wasn't part of her story at all times. I wonder why hasn't that been translated into film? We're kind of denying that these stories have value. We're not making them count. And there's a lot of people in this mix. It's not just one specific ethnicity or race. It's all kinds of different people from different countries that are dealing with this, family members, communities, schools. It's such a big story. Yeah. And it just feels so bizarre to me that it's just not being talked about. It's not even in the periphery of Hollywood.
So are there filmmakers that you feel these days are doing a good job trying to push in this direction?
I'm really taken with Gregory Nava's work, who made the Selena movie, but he also, what his first big breakout movie was El Norte, which was 1982.
Inspired by a dream.
Al norte.
El Norte.
They traveled thousands of miles to get to a new land. But their journey was just beginning.
It was one of the first big films to come out that showed what a harrowing experience it could be to leave your home, escape violence from Central America, and come to the United States, and what a difficult journey that was. That's just one example of what the immigration story could be. Mira Neer probably is then another one. She did The Namesake. I'm also interested in the different generations of people coming here, but also then their children and then their children's children, how they negotiate that cultural identity, or different generations of either South Americans or Caribbean Americans. Maybe they try to hide the fact that they were from a different country and they don't teach their children Spanish or something like that. And then other generations are much more proud of that and they hold on to tradition a lot closer. It's a bigger thing that they're able to speak with their grandparents in their native language.
What did you think? Random question. What did you think of Crazy Rich Asians?
I loved Crazy Rich Asians.
Really?
Yeah. Did you not?
I don't know. It's like it was great. It was great to see an all-Asian cast. It was great to see this story being told about families in two different parts of the world and how they interact. And there's questions of race and class.
Yes.
Class.
Definitely class.
Right. So it was great. I don't know. I guess my expectations were higher for all the hype that I got.
Oh,
so,
for me, it delivered. But then again,
but I don't
we
watch
can
that
always
many
find
movies.
that. But I think, different things can work for different people as long as you say like why it worked for you or why it didn't work for you. Your argument's legitimate. My thing was...
Because that's too bad, because this podcast was going to get really interesting. Continue, I'm sorry.
My thing was, I had gone back to Cuba, and I've gone back twice now. And there's been moments where here in the United States I identify as Cuban American or as Cuban as a shorthand, just because I grew up in Florida and I felt very much like an outsider, either because of my accent, either because of the things I ate, the things I identified with, the different ways that my family spoke to me. There were ways that I didn't feel like everyone else. But then when I went back to Cuba, everyone would put me back in my place. You're not Cuban. You're not from here. You're from there. And so seeing that play out on the big screen, like it hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah. Because I'm sure that central character also felt like, she's very much in touch with, being an Asian American, but that is its own identity. And maybe she had problems here, but she also has all these cultural problems over there. And then that they look down on you. Yeah, I definitely went through that.
Well, as I think about it more, it was the relationship between her and her mom that I found actually the most interesting.
Oh, I love it.
And actually, both of the kids and their moms.
Yes.
Was really, really interesting. Because there was that tension and there was that caring. And then
I'm also very close with my mom, so she was the one who got me into movies. So the moment I got out of that movie, I was texting her. I'm like, you have to see this. Get back to me when you do.
All right, so you've got Sundance coming up.
Yes.
You've got the Oscars coming up. So... I could easily ask you, what are your predictions? So I'm not going to ask you that question. I'm going to throw you a curveball.
Oh, no.
So let's say one or both of those events announce the Monica Castillo Lifetime Achievement Award.
Oh, God. Too early.
Not because you've got a lifetime ahead of you, right? But the purpose of this award is to identify the filmmaker or the actor or the actress that has brought the immigrant story into film. Who are your top? I'll give you three choices.
I'd probably go back to Nava. Just because, I was also growing up when a lot of, when Selena came out and Mi Familia. So those were really big movies for me. I'm blanking on his name right now, but I would probably also nominate the person who adapted The Joy Luck Club. Yeah. Because that was also a really big movie for me, and I came to it relatively late. But just to see the different experiences and the different relationships between mother and daughter, maybe it's a personal bias, but it's great to see because women's stories are so missing from the screen. Just in general, across the board, but specifically like the stories of immigrant women. Yeah, I hardly ever see that. See, it's a little easier for me to come up with some TV folks, but
you can go with TV. It's okay.
I adore the movie Daughters of the Dust. It is not specifically an immigration film because it is about the descendants of slaves who settled in the Geechee Islands. It's a big intergenerational gathering that happens, and this is when the movie takes place. But there's a big debate on whether or not to go north, to go towards where jobs are, to where cities are, things like that. Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust, I think, perfectly gets the negotiations between what it's like to bring your culture with you or the debate of staying and going. A lot of immigrant stories, naturally so, follow that journey. I think we don't look at the point of leaving as often or as much. I only got to, for me coming to America, I always assumed it was a positive thing. Like, that's how I grew up. Seeing that affected my family, like, obviously going from living in a communist country and not having a lot of opportunities, or my grandfather having to work multiple jobs to get a very small living. Then you were able to come to the United States, learn trades, do things. I was able to go to college, all different things that probably would not have been possible back on the island. But I hadn't seen what that experience was like leaving until I went that first time in 2015. The day I got there, they just randomly announced that they were no longer going to allow doctors to leave the country, and my cousin is a doctor over there, and she had to basically get her things, say goodbye to her loved ones, and leave by the end of the week. She was able to appeal for an emergency visa out, and she left. But it was a really scary moment, and it was really sad. And I didn't know that sadness. I hadn't seen that sadness in the same way, because I was just like, oh, no, this is a good thing. Like, you're going to America. It's fine. Mm-hmm. But no, it's really scary. And you don't know if you're going to see your loved ones again. And maybe this is goodbye. I haven't seen that story on the big screen. Right. And that movie captures all of those feelings all at once. There's not been a time where I've seen the movie and haven't cried,
Is Daughters of the Dust?
Daughters of the Dust, yeah.
Huh. But you're absolutely right. There's this romanticizing, however you say that word.
Romanticizing the journey.
Right. Or the arrival.
Or the arrival, yeah.
But not the anguish of why people leave.
Yeah. Another one that does that pretty well is Elia Kazan's America, which he made in the 60s, and it was about his uncle or his dad. His journey leaving was so traumatic. And I mean, the movie is just like a Sisyphusian journey of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, then trying to go to the United States. So by the end of the 2 hours of you seeing this poor kid struggle, trying to escape, he finally makes it to Ellis Island.
My name is Elia Kazan. I am a Greek by blood, a Turk by birth, and an American because my uncle made a journey. This story was told me over the years by the old people in my family. They remember Anatolia, the great central plateau of Turkey and Asia. And they remember the mountain air standing above the plain. But the day came, here in Anatolia, as everywhere where there's oppression. People began to question. There were bursts of violence, sudden and reckless. People began to wonder, and some to search for another home.
You say that in America they have mountains bigger than this one?
In America, everything's bigger.
What else? What else in America?
What are we waiting for? Come on, you. Let's go, you. Let's go with the help of Jesus.
I was in tears. It hit me like really heavily to finally see that, because there's only so many setbacks, and it took him years to be able to finally make that journey.
Wow.
Maybe another one that now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, now it's too many. But I really like Kumail Nanjiani's The Big Sick.
Yeah, that was an amazing...
It's an amazing film. And it's not specifically about the immigrant journey, but it's about the immigrant experience in the United States. Yeah. And what is it like to maybe disappoint your parents because you're not coming back, you're not bringing home a partner from the same country, or the different cultural differences. When Zoe Kazan's character freaks out about finding all the pictures of the girls in his room, I think about that a lot, because every once in a while I also visit my cousins or different family members, and they're always, asking me about, and your boyfriend. And I'm like, are we going there already? We haven't even sat down for dinner. It's a big cultural
Yeah.
difference in comparison to here, to where, maybe people don't want to talk about it. People don't care.
Yeah.
You get married whenever you want.
Right.
And for us, it's maybe still a really big issue, the fact that, we're almost getting to our 30s or in our 30s and we're still don't have a ring on it.
Yeah, he did a great job with that film.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I loved him in Silicon Valley.
Oh, yeah.
But I gotta say, you didn't mention my favorite movie, like Coming to America.
Oh, that was on my list.
It was on your list.
Yeah, that's also really fun because he subverts a lot of the tropes. It's not, it can be like a sort of like always a tragic thing, like the journey's so dramatic and traumatic, but it doesn't have to be. And Eddie Murphy has a lot of fun with that.
Right.
The culture shock that he goes through is not a trauma, it's punchlines.
Right.
Yeah. And because he's such a ridiculous character, he's coming from a fictional country, he doesn't have any sort of baggage, but it's just so much fun to watch.
Yeah.
And to see him have fun with all of that.
Although you should see the look on people's face when they ask, so what's your favorite immigration movie? Because
Yeah.
they're expecting something very serious, like Coming to America. They're terribly
It's a great
disappointed.
one.
I think it's great.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the movies I want to write about.
So let's say we're having this conversation in 5-10 years. Looking back, have things improved or not, and why?
Well, I hope by then they will have improved. That all this talk about diversity in Hollywood and things like that, it is not just talk, that we actually start putting into practice. Right now, we haven't seen those numbers shift in terms of more opportunities for women, more opportunities for women of color. The needle has to move. I have to believe that it's capable of moving. Otherwise, why am I constantly in the trenches writing about the filmmakers that I want to see more of? We haven't seen those changes yet. Unfortunately, unlike television, which there's so much more of, 300 some odd shows between all the cable channels. That's just domestic. That's not including like international productions and things like that. They far outpace movies, and in terms of the risk and the different stories that they can play with, they've definitely been much more inclusive. So I really hope that movies kind of catch up. It feels like movies right now are like 10 years behind. I really want to see what that new Hollywood looks like. There's that new Hollywood that we have the term for movies that broke out of the studio system in the 70s and things like that. But I really want to see what's the new Hollywood of what does an inclusive Hollywood look like? What does a Hollywood look like that doesn't freak out every time a movie breaks box office expectations that happens to be led by people of color? I think they expected Crazy Rich Asians to underperform, and then it exceeded expectations. I don't think they expected Black Panther to perform as well as it did. I would like that to stop being the expectation that we just have to be graded on a curve, or that we're going to live up to the hype.
We shouldn't be surprised anymore.
Maybe we shouldn't be surprised anymore. One of the things that I really want to move away from, there had been a really feminist movie that really tried hard, but wow, it was so mediocre. I just couldn't get behind it. But one of the things is we shouldn't have to expect people of color, women of color, immigrant filmmakers always to knock it out of the park. Like, that is an unreal expectation.
Right.
If you're creating art, there's no way you can be 100% successful 100% of the time. That is an anomaly. Why do we have to shoulder those burdens at all times? I would like to see us to have the chance to fail, and it's not automatically the end of someone's career, or it doesn't reflect on the rest of us. That was one of the big conversations about Crazy Rich Asians, is that if this movie did poorly at the box office, that's it. We're not going to see another one of these.
No more Asians.
No, for what, 25 years? It was
Yeah.
25 years since the last Asian American cast movie hit theaters like this. Oh my gosh, that's awful.
Yeah.
What kind of pressure are you putting on this poor little film to break everything and be everything for everyone? Because that was one of the things that also came out of it. A lot of people spoke up and said that this doesn't represent me. That's totally legit.
Right.
That's a legitimate critique. But no one movie should have to represent an entire group of people.
Right. That's called a home movie.
I think when Scorsese puts out a movie, no one is expecting him to speak on behalf of all Italian Americans at all times.
Yeah.
Or as well as Italians. That's just an expectation that white filmmakers don't have to deal with. And it's not pressure. Even in my career, too, I'm learning to kind of unpack this from a writer's standpoint and as a journalist. Whenever I hit failure, there are moments where I feel like it doesn't just reflect on me. It reflects on Latinos at large. It reflects on women in the media industry. Like, I let them down. That's so much pressure. That is so much extra guilt that you put on yourself. just in a way that maybe the people next to you don't even think about.
So I have one last request of you.
Mm-hmm.
So the name of the podcast is Only in America. So if you can finish the sentence, Only in America, ...
Only in America can you have so many different opportunities. Even just in my own story, in my own experience, the chance to be able to change majors, to change careers, that's not usually an option in different places. Or it's made out of necessity. Like I was actually able to pursue something that I wanted to do, and I somehow made it work. I'm not sure that everyone gets that shot. I know a lot of my family hasn't had that opportunity. So I'm really happy that I've been able to accomplish what I've accomplished so far and hope to accomplish yet more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for the time. Monica Castillo is a writer, critic, and reporter based in Brooklyn, New York. There's more about Monica at our website, immigrationforum.org, where you can subscribe to Only in America, and heck, you can even share Only in America with your friends and family.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
Thanks for listening to Only in America. I'm betting on Black Panther, Roma, and Bohemian Rhapsody to sweep the 2019 Oscars. I'm not saying you should take my advice, but still, that's my prediction. In any case, the show this week is produced by Regina Medina and Emily Chow. Kathleen Farrell is the executive producer. Thanks for listening. I'm Ali Noorani.